Welcome back to Winning Hand. My name is Boomguy, and I am here with AndyR to do our ongoing deck series called All Hands on Decks. Andy, how you doing?
I'm doing all right. How about yourself?
I'm so good. We did episode 1, and that was about a Nightcrawler Justice deck from Castle Frank 47. So hopefully you watched that. But if you didn't, let's give you a quick intro on what this series is, because it is a little different than my standard Winning Hand content. If you came here thinking you were going to get one card at a time, I'm sorry, but do not adjust your dial. You are in the right place, but this is not the standard mainline Winning Hand podcast. This is an offshoot that is only on YouTube, so you can only hit here. It's going to be short episodes highlighting deck builders that we think deserve a little more recognition, that make awesome decks, but maybe aren't the big deck builders that we see a lot on Marvel CDB. No shade at them, their decks are awesome. So, we are specifically calling out deck builders on Marvel CDB that have a score on the website, however that score is calculated, but under 3,000. So, pretty liberal, I think. But it's a chance to show off deck builders who maybe deserve more recognition. What do you think?
Yeah, I love that idea. As said last time, I always feel like that is a number for, well, at least for me when I go through, that I think, I might be a little more skeptical, but I'd love to debunk that. There are phenomenal deck builders who may not have had the score or the notice or the name recognition, and so a chance to showcase them? Absolutely.
So we use the Mark Rosewater blog post that he did about Magic the Gathering, and he classifies players into 3 different types. And we talked about those a little more extensively in the first episode. So if you're not sure what those are, please go back and look. I will include the links to those written materials one more time in this episode, but kind of going forward, I'll assume that you know what that is. So Mark Rosewater, in a blog post for Magic the Gathering a long time ago, talks about the Spike, the Johnny, and the Timmy. Andy, can you give us like a quick, succinct summation of what those 3 are?
Yeah, your Spike player is out to win no matter what. And so they are going to be ruthlessly efficient with every card in their deck. So you might think of the player who wants to rock solo Champions League. Like they're just going to nail every aspect of it. The Johnny player is the person who loves to find cool combos. And so it may win, it may not, but they are out to showcase something special or unique or fun. And then the Timmy player is the person who loves the big plays. May win, may not, but man, they are, I like to consider them the Hulk player, the one who just wants to do 13 damage and be done. Just remove a side scheme for 5 threat and be done. And so they want just the big plays.
Yeah, I am a strong Johnny player. I like building quirky decks that may or may not win. I don't care about winning as much as I just like doing weird stuff. My co-host of the normal podcast, Lazy Titan, is a strong Timmy player. He wants to play Dive Bomb as much as possible. He plays Angel, and he recurs Dive Bomb and splashes damage over and over again. He loves doing that. And then, I know some spikes. I think my other co-host, Lethis, is a spike. He's very methodical, thinking about effective resource cost and kind of balancing the curve and making sure he's hitting exactly his efficiency numbers. So he's going to win, as quickly as possible. Not using splashy, not using combos. So that's it's actually, now that I think about it, it's kind of interesting that the standard podcast
that you each have,
we have one of the 3 of us there represented. Yeah. We should talk about that sometime. Anyway,
that's pretty cool.
We are going to talk about these decks kind of briefly what they are. We're going to show off the deck list on Marvel CDB, and we're going to talk through it, talk through some card choices, talk through our thoughts on it, and we'll classify it into one of those 3 so that if you're interested in the deck and you resonate with one of those 3, you maybe can see yourself playing this deck, and hopefully you will. Without further ado, are you ready to jump into today's deck?
Let's do it.
All right. This is one that you brought along today. It is called Nightcrawler the FightBrawler. I love that title. I'm a sucker for
it's a
fun
great
titles.
Title. Absolutely.
I will not walk us through all the titles of the decks I've published. Some of them are inappropriate. This is by a deck builder called Lunar Biscuit, who has a score of 60. That's the lowest one we've had so far. And this is a Nightcrawler protection deck that AndyR sought out and brought along. So, Andy, why don't you tell us a little bit about the deck and how it plays?
Yeah, so when Nightcrawler came out, he was announced, everyone imagined protection as being Nightcrawler's main thing. And this deck gives, I think, a good spin on how to take some things that are just good about protection, good about Nightcrawler, and put them together. And the deck does so in a pretty fun way, and it actually highlights one of my favorite Nightcrawler cards that anytime I draw, I'm excited about, and that's Tally Ho. Not only for the name, because I just think it's fun to tally ho, but because it is one of the best ways to do damage and protect your BAMF economy, because that matters in Nightcrawler. And this deck, I think, just has a good sense of how to play standard protection well.
Yeah. His economy is interesting, right? BAMF is really fun, but I'm always a little sad every time BAMF gets discarded. Even though it means I've done my job, it's like, ooh, it's like, something else I can't do later. So this deck is pretty defense heavy, right? It has a low cost curve. The opening line of the deck description says it all. Like, this is fighting on the villain phase. So riposte, Not Today in Desperate Defense. Jocasta is going to hold some of those defense events. Angel's Eyrie is going to allow us to collect those counters every time we defend, which is a lot. Armored Vest, Change of Fortune, all the kind of standard stuff that you would expect to see here. I'm a little surprised I didn't see, and regular winning hand viewers will know I'm terrible with card names. There's the one that it came with Shadowcat that does 4 damage, I think, on the villain turn.
Powerful Punch.
Powerful Punch, yeah. I'm a little surprised that's not in here. But I guess if you're playing this solo, Not Today maybe makes more sense because you need that threat removal. I might have included another copy of Unflappable for that reason. Or not Unflappable, excuse me. Hard to Ignore for that reason, because often it's just quicker to find, and then you can trigger it twice, so you can remove a little more threat. But overall, I don't know how much I would change about this deck. It's pretty built around like that one thing, right? Jocasta's a great include here. It's not an X-Men ally, but he also doesn't have Utopia, or they don't have Utopia. So that matters less, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially in the way that this deck handles itself of, like, you talked about BAMF not being something that you necessarily want to discard. Well, if you have Desperate Defense, you can use that as your first defense. And if you don't get attacked again, you have no need. You can leave the BAMF out for a rainy day, or if someone draws, a villain attack, assault, or gang up.
Desperate Defense is just such a good classic card, and I still use it in so many builds. It's great with any of those heroes who get a defense anyway. Like I'm thinking of Nightcrawler, I'm thinking of Quicksilver, I'm thinking of Ghost Spider, right? Like I can use Desperate Defense and still have my other ready potentially if I want to use it. So that's just really cool. I think I use it more than Not Today. Riposte is pretty new. I haven't really dug into that one too much, but it's a good include here, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially, as the FightBrawler, he definitely has set up for needing tools on the villain phase, and this deck builder gave Nightcrawler those tools. And even as they put in that last paragraph where threat control through Not Today and through Hard to Ignore, especially in a 2-player game, like that's a good amount of tools, because not everything needs to be damage, though this deck centers on villain damage or villain phase damage. It is still good to make sure that you're balancing out, especially if you're going to make the check mark on the solo side.
Yeah, I think. Okay, so let's see. Let's talk about power, and then we'll kind of categorize it. For me, I think I will admit I have not played this deck, but looking at it, I've played decks similar to it. I think one of the issues I find with defense decks like this is that you do at times run into the situation where you just draw a bunch of defense cards, and maybe the villain is stunned, or maybe the villain is scheming because your other player has slipped down, and you just don't really have anything to do. That I would have included cards like Bait and Switch or Taunt. I think Bait and Switch, much maligned, but I think there is space for Bait and Switch in here. In the game, certainly, and maybe in this deck. You want things sometimes that are going to trigger those attacks on you, because there's nothing worse than playing a defense deck, and then for whatever reason something happens and you don't defend, and then it's like, oh, all my hard to ignore didn't trigger, my unflappable didn't trigger, nothing happened, and I just have like not today in my hand,
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that of planning out, especially as you mentioned the alter ego side of, even though this deck may not flip often, with Angel's Eerie in there, there's going to be at least one flip to be able to manage. Because sometimes with Nightcrawler, if you get minion swarmed, your health will go down. And you are going to want that flip and that Eerie to lift it back up. So have some cards in there to make that alter ego flip worth it. And this is kind of lacking a couple of those things. As good of a deck as it is, and in my playing it in solo a few times, I think it's well done, and probably one of the benefits of Nightcrawler in protection, and when you do something like this where you may not use all your defense cards, at least that means on the hero side, you're using it in order to get your BAMF back.
Yeah. I think, okay, so let's talk about the three players. Who wants this deck? Is this a Spike deck, a Johnny deck, or a Timmy deck, Andy? Who wants this deck?
Yeah, so honestly, I see this between a Timmy and a Johnny. So definitely in the Johnny side, in that you're setting up big defenses, right? Hard to ignore, electrostatic armor, dauntless. You're setting up to be able to do fun combos or do lots of things based on your defense. But also that is where it kind of leans into that Timmy, where you're taking your biggest asset, which is defense, and you're going to play an event to enhance that to do something big. And so even though it might sometimes be a little on the scattered side, I see it between those two. So I think a Johnny player will absolutely reach for this. I think it's accessible for a Timmy player.
I agree with you. I think that is spot on. Initially, my thought was, is this a Spike deck? Because, you're turning a basic defense into a cascade of things, right? Drawing cards, killing enemies, unflappable, draw more cards, thwarting with hard to ignore. So, but the more I think about it, I think that player isn't usually drawn to these defense decks because they're just not as efficient as you could get with something else. So my initial thought went there, but I think you're right. I think it's between a Johnny and a Timmy. Johnny likes this probably. Timmy, can get behind it. I played a 2-player game with Lazy Titan, one of my co-hosts recently, who played this, and he did essentially this, but he was defending and dealing, 4, 5, 6, 7 damage each time, and just those big numbers, and he thought that was great. So I think I agree with your assessment there. Okay, so you said you played it a little bit in solo. Did it hold up in solo?
It did. It held up great. So especially with Nightcrawler, and some of it is I'm okay to lose my hand to BAMF if it means that I get to have an activation. And once his cutlasses are out, his 2-threat or 2-attack, I'm ready to do whatever it is. So I always felt like I had an answer to what was going on the villain phase. And so this was a fun one to take up. I took it up against Sabretooth because I just wanted to know if I'm going to incrementally tear down someone who can incrementally build back up, how do those things go together? And this deck did a great job. I never had to worry about threat, and I did enough pinging and enough 3 damage here to be able to always do more damage than he was healing.
So some of these decks that focus on defense, especially in solo, can turn into a marathon. It can be a slog sometimes because you're doing 2 damage here, 3 damage here, and you're exhausted, right? Then you're not doing anything on your turn. They can, I think, drag out a little bit. Did you find that to be the case with this deck?
Not in this deck. And I do think this is something for those who choose to do protection, especially in solo. Like you said, there has to be a point whether you're building the deck that you can pivot to just start hitting your damage. Because I think sometimes protection, because they want to do lots of little things, will try to keep a perfect board state, and they'll never make that pivot to actually start doing the damage, trusting the combos. And this deck, I felt like there was a clear point when my upgrades were out, particularly once Dauntless and Electrostatic Armor were out, that I was able to turn and pivot into attacks. And I do think, like you called out, the Change of Fortune and Unflappable, drawing 3 cards, I am replenishing my hand. And then on the hero side, playing my non-tally-ho events.
Yeah, super good. Okay, well, I think this is a deck I also would like to try. Nightcrawler has not quite vibed with me the way I thought he would, but this is interesting, and I may give it a shot. So thanks for bringing this deck along. Thank you to Lunar Biscuit, who I don't know and didn't ask before I shared their deck, but I will leave a comment now saying that we talked about it, so in case they're interested. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed the deck. If anybody plays it and has an experience with it, leave a comment down below. Let me know. I'm curious how others feel about this. And we will see you around for the next episode of All Hands on Decks. Thanks, Andy.
Sounds great. Thanks so much.
Bye, everybody.